Hello everybody. This presentation is going to be on Rosemary Radford Ruether. She's a Catholic theologian and an ecofeminist. So, getting into a little bio here. She was born in 1936 in St. Paul, Minnesota, to a Roman Catholic mother and an Episcopal father. When she was 12, her father died, and then they moved to California. Later, she went to Scripps College and eventually received her doctorate at Claremont Graduate School. She has received multiple honorary doctorates, I think 9 in total, and she's retired now, but she was a visiting professor at Claremont Theological Seminary and Claremont Graduate School, where she taught religion and feminist studies. So looking at a little bit of her work, she's written 36 books and 600 plus articles. Some of these books include Sexism and God Talk Toward a Feminist Theology. That's one that we're going to read in class, I think in week 9. Gaia and God, an Ecofeminist Theology for Earth Healing. Goddesses and the Divine Feminine, a Western Religious History. And so many more. She is a leading voice in ecofeminism, feminist theology, women's ordination, especially in the Catholic Church, but not solely, and also she's a pro-choice advocate in the Catholic Church. So she has a strong feminist voice in the church and has been a pioneer in some of these theological issues. So delving into one of her most popular topics is ecofeminism, and like I said, I would consider her a pioneer in this. It's a very interesting theology, and it's exciting to learn about. So ecofeminists discern both a symbolic and structural connection between the mistreatment of women and the mistreatment of nature in patriarchal cultures and social systems. So the idea behind this is that same domination that ecologists might look at between human beings and non-human species, that domination that we have over nature is connected to that domination that men have over women. She writes, an ecological feminist theology of nature must rethink the whole Western theological tradition of the hierarchical chain of being and chain of command. This theology must question the hierarchy of human over non-human nature as a relationship of ontological and moral value. It must challenge the right of the human to treat the non-human as private property and material wealth to be exploited. It must unmask the structures of social domination, male over female, owner over worker, that mediate the domination of non-human nature. Finally, it must question the model of hierarchy that starts with non-material spirit, God, as the source of the chain of being and continues down to the non-spiritual matter as the bottom of the chain of being and the most inferior, valueless, and dominated point in the chain of command. So those are quotes from her book, Sexism and God Talk. And this ecofeminist struggle is against the ecological devastation that's interconnected with patriarchy. So that's something that she writes a lot about and is a very interesting topic. The next thing, which I'm just going to briefly touch on, I didn't want to spend too much time explaining because this is something that we're going to look at in class, and I'm very excited to see what everyone has to say about this issue because it's very, Darren points out in the lecture that it's provocative, and that is the point of this claim, and it's just to stretch our minds a little bit and think differently about this issue. So the topic is, can a male Christ save a woman? Which is so interesting to think about. This is also from her book, Sexism and God Talk, Toward a Feminist Theology. It says, the male alone is a normative or generic sex of the human species. Only the male represents the fullness of human nature, whereas woman is defective physically, morally, and mentally. It follows that the incarnation of the Logos of God into a male is not a historical accident, but an ontological necessity. Just as Christ has to be incarnated in a male, so only can the male represent Christ. So it's really questioning this idea of the maleness of Christ, and it does talk about in this book there are some alternate Christologies that she brings up, such as androgynous Christologies and spirit Christologies, but eventually she gets to feminist Christologies that really question this idea. Lastly, another one of her works, Goddesses and the Divine Feminine, and this is a look at some of the history of goddesses and the female characteristics of God, and in church history and in history in general. She looks at goddesses of the ancient Mediterranean world. She also looks at the diminishing presence of the female view of Yahweh in Hebrew thought. And she looks at female symbols in early Christianity, such as the female Holy Spirit, Mother Church, Bridal Soul, and Mary, Mother of God. At the beginning of this book, she writes that in 1968, a feminist critique of male-dominated societies started to emerge in the civil rights movement. In the early 60s, I had already questioned the way Catholicism treated women's sexuality and reproductive role. Now I began to reflect on how women had been marginalized throughout the whole of religious history, asking what had been the causes of this long history of domination and what might be sources for the affirmations of women as full and equal persons. So this just gives a general understanding of how she got to this point, and how she started questioning this idea of male-dominated societies, along with God's presence as being male-dominated. So this is definitely part of, we can see it all interconnected in the three different theological questions that were in this presentation. She's stretching the minds of the norm and things that we're used to thinking, and I think that's good. I think she does a great job at being very provocative and stretching our thinking. And again, she is a pioneer in this field, very, very well written and well educated. So that is Rosemary Radford Ruether.